Want to know a word that always confuses me? One word. It's tired. It always confuses me. And the way that it is being used today is an assessment of the way Khabib looked on the scale. He looks tired, which we are then to foreshadow that he will be fatigued for the match because he's so drawn out. The only reason it confuses me, and I never really see it, is we are now on what's called a 24-hour weigh-in, which means a guy weighs in and he will not be to the ring for 24 hours. The first fight of the night is 24 hours away. The main event is another 5 or 6 hours after that. Okay, broad stroke though, we're 24-hour weigh-in. And there's not very many sports out there. There's not very many professions, if any, aside from combat, where you must weigh in to be eligible to go to work. So when I bring you a comparison to amateur wrestling, which is one of the very few things in life that you can do or will do where they weigh you in prior to allowing you to do it, to use wrestling as an example, the NCAA, which is the governing body, does what's called an hour weigh-in, meaning they put you on a scale and 1 hour later, you're on the mat competing. Now, the NCAA was very effective in their goal. And what their goal was when they made it for an hour weigh-in, of which it wasn't always. This came along in 1998. Prior to that, you could have as much as a week weigh-in. I was in college when the NCAA implemented this, and I can remember just by example, but the University of Oregon, where I attended, we did what was called a California road trip. We would drive all through California wrestling from Bakersfield to Fresno to Cal Poly to we would just make our way all around Fullerton. We would weigh in Eugene, Oregon, our home, before we ever got on a airplane and then ultimately got in a van and then drove. Sometimes it was a week. I wouldn't see a scale for a week, but I'd be wrestling somebody every day. That's fine. That's above board. That's the way it used to be. But the NCAA wanted to do away with weight cutting. How do you force a grown adult in a sport of which you regulate and you made it for weight classes? How do you force them to not cut weight? So the NCAA very creatively, very quickly said, we're going to put you on the scale 1 hour after you weigh in. Now, if you were dehydrated, you'd be ready to wrestle for about 5 seconds. If you were partially hydrated, you would wrestle about a minute before you cramped up and met exhaustion. So the NCAA successfully and quickly was able to, in large part, do away with weight cutting. I only share the history with you because it's a very relevant thing that these athletes, in a wrestling standpoint, are competing 1 hour after they weigh in. You're talking about a 24-hour weigh-in, so to bring up how anybody looked on a scale and then try to juxtapose that with how they're going to look and perform tomorrow is a bit of a stretch for me. Particularly when you have a guy named Khabib Nurmagomedov who's done this 28 other times. And whenever you talk about the way that a guy looked on a scale, sucked, dehydrated, drained, lack of energy, doesn't that mean he looked how he was supposed to look? I mean, wouldn't a guy kind of be out of energy by the time he made the weigh-in? A specific weight at a very specific time, wouldn't you? If you, for your job, had to weigh a specific thing at a specific time, wouldn't you be a little bit drained for it in all fairness? And then the same word confuses me on fight night itself. You'll have a guy who wins a fight, and some of the commentary after the fact is he looked tired. Shouldn't he? Wouldn't we expect that? I mean, us as the viewer, the audience who is parting with our time and money to watch somebody do something of physical exertion, wouldn't we be a little bit annoyed if they didn't exert themselves to the fullest? If he's going to go out there and work 80% of his capacity, wouldn't we like 20% of our money back? So when a guy comes out of a ring and he looks anything less than exhausted, shouldn't we be irritated by that as opposed to pointing to it as though it's a negative? Shouldn't a guy be very tired by the time he's weighing in? Shouldn't a guy be very tired by the time the game is over? I think you could carry that to any sport. If you're going to watching interviews with football players or basketball players or baseball players at the end of a game and he's sitting there talking to you with barely a sweat on his brow and he's not deep huffing and puffing for air, don't we have the right to believe perhaps he didn't give it his all? Which on the other side of a coin, when a guy is very fatigued, hasn't he given us what he was supposed to?